The most dangerous man you will ever meet is not who you think he is. When we think of danger, our minds instinctively paint a specific picture. We think of physical mass, an aggressive posture, or a loud, dominating voice. We think of the man who uses intimidation to bend a room to his will, but that isn't true danger, that is just overcompensated fragility. True danger is quiet. It is the man sitting in the corner of the room whom you almost didn't notice. He isn't trying to prove anything. He isn't checking his phone for validation, and he isn't participating in superficial small talk. Yet, if you look closely, he commands the entire space without saying a word. This man was not born with this presence. He was not gifted this level of supreme confidence or unshakable stillness. He was made. Specifically, he was made in a fire that most people spend their entire lives running away from. What crawled out of the other side of that fire is an entirely different species of human being, someone the average person is completely unprepared to handle. I need you to stay locked into this message for just a few minutes, because by the end of this breakdown, you are either going to recognize this man in your life, or you are going to realize that you are currently in the middle of the brutal process of becoming him. Let's dismantle the word dangerous. In our modern society, we are conditioned to believe that dangerous means violent, destructive, or toxic. But we aren't talking about physical violence or malice at all. We are talking about something infinitely more potent. We are talking about a man who has been completely, systematically, and utterly destroyed by life, someone whose entire world was flattened to zero, and who made the conscious, solitary choice to rebuild himself from the ash. Think about the depth of that choice. He had no support groups. He had no savior coming to rescue him. No one held his hand through the dark nights, and no one offered him a soft place to land. It was just him, his reality, and the terrifying decision to either stay broken forever or to morph into something that could only be built by surviving the absolute worst. Most people run from that kind of raw psychological pain. They numb it with cheap dopamine, they drown it in alcohol, or they mask it with short-term distractions. But this man didn't run. He walked straight into the storm, looked it in the eye, and let it burn away everything that was weak. That single decision changes a man's DNA forever. To understand the power of this man, you have to understand how he was broken. Every dangerous man starts exactly the same way, with absolute, total demolition. This isn't about experiencing a minor setback, a bad breakup, or a temporary financial dip. This is the kind of broken where you wake up in the morning, look at yourself in the mirror, and literally do not recognize the person staring back at you. It is the kind of heavy, suffocating silence that feels like a physical weight crushing your chest. Let me look at a real-world case study. Let's call him Jay. Jay is 46 years old. He did everything right according to the standard societal script. He went to school, built a stable, high-performing career, bought the house with the white picket fence, married the woman he loved, and had children he would gladly lay down his life for. His entire identity, his purpose, and his sense of self-worth were completely anchored in those roles. He was a provider, a husband, and a father. Then, over the course of a single year, the foundation cracked. His wife filed for divorce. Before the legal paperwork was even processed, she was already dating someone else. Just pause for a second and look at the brutal reality of what that does to a man's psyche. This isn't just a legal separation. It is a total, unmitigated slaughter of his entire reality. Suddenly, Jay's life is consumed by aggressive family lawyers, hostile court dates, endless custody hearings, and legal bills that accumulate faster than he can open them. He is forced to pack a single suitcase and move out of the home he spent decades paying for. He is now sleeping on a cheap mattress in a small, sterile rented apartment, and the psychological knife goes deeper. While he is staring at the ceiling of that rented room at 3 a.m., another man is sleeping in his bed, living in his house, and stepping into the daily life that Jay built with his own sweat and labor. The psychological torture reaches its peak when the legal system gets involved. The mother asks for full custody. Jay, a man who never missed a little league game, who read bedtime stories every single night, and who worked 60-hour weeks to ensure his family wanted for nothing, is suddenly deemed a weekend visitor by a judge who doesn't know his name. He is granted a scheduled, highly regulated window of time just to see his own blood. the thought of another man sitting at his kitchen table, raising his children, and becoming the primary male figure they remember growing up is a level of psychological trauma that words cannot fully capture. It is a slow, agonizing execution of a man's soul. When a man is subjected to this level of sustained, inescapable psychological trauma, the damage isn't just emotional, it is profoundly biological. The human body does not separate emotional betrayal from physical threat. When Jay lies awake at night replaying the court hearings, his brain perceives a chronic state of survival. The immediate result is a biological flood. Cortisol, the primary stress hormone, is pumped into his bloodstream continuously, day and night. In short bursts, cortisol saves your life. In chronic, unyielding doses, it acts as absolute biological warfare. Over time, elevated cortisol systematically dismantles a man's physiology. First, his testosterone levels tank dramatically. Testosterone isn't just about physical strength, it is the chemical driver of a man's motivation, his competitive drive, his confidence, and his resilience. When testosterone collapses, his vital energy goes completely silent. His sleep architecture becomes totally fragmented. Because his nervous system is locked in a permanent fight-or-flight response, his brain refused to enter deep, restorative sleep. It is hypervigilant, expecting another blow. This sleep deprivation compounds everything. His immune system begins to fail, leaving him constantly exhausted and prone to illness. His heart is forced to work exponentially harder, operating under a baseline of constant tension. His cognitive functions degrade, his memory slips, his focus blurs, and simple decision-making feels like wading through wet cement. Now, imagine carrying this internal biological decay while having to wake up every single morning, put on a professional face, and walk into a high-stakes work environment acting like everything is completely fine. Jay is a commission-based salesman. If he doesn't close deals, he doesn't earn money. If he doesn't earn money, he can't pay the lawyers to fight for his kids. But his mind is completely fractured. He sits across from clients trying to execute complex business deals while his internal projector is replaying the last text message from his ex-wife or the latest invoice from his attorney. Naturally, his performance drops. His numbers crater. His sales manager, completely detached from the human tragedy occurring behind the scenes, pulls him into an office and gives him a cold ultimatum. Hit your targets or we have to make a change. Nobody asks why his numbers dropped. Nobody inquires about his mental health or what is happening at home. Why? Because the modern corporate machine does not pause for broken men. It demands production, and if you cannot produce, you are replaced. As a man's external world crumbles, a terrifying social phenomenon occurs: total isolation. At first, coworkers and acquaintances know vaguely what Jay is going through, but they keep their distance. It's a harsh truth about human nature. Most people are deeply uncomfortable with raw, visceral male suffering. They don't know what to say to a man who is visibly drowning, so they pretend they don't see the water over his head. They look away to avoid the discomfort. Then come the friends. They don't disappear all at once. It happens gradually, like water evaporating. They stop inviting him to weekend gatherings. The phone calls become shorter, moving from deep conversations to generic texts until they stop completely. People naturally distance themselves when they realize a man needs something real from them, true presence, time, and emotional weight, and they simply don't have the capacity or the willingness to give it. This leaves Jay completely alone in the void. Let this land for a second. Jay spends Father's Day completely isolated in his rented room, eating cold takeout container food. He is working a grueling part-time weekend job on top of his demanding full-time career just to keep up with the predatory legal fees, meaning he has no free time, no disposable income, and no peace. He experiences the holidays, Christmas, New Year's, his own birthday in absolute silence. One evening, driven by the sheer desperation of loneliness, he forces himself to go out to a local restaurant just to be around human beings, just to escape the four walls of his apartment. But the experiment fails completely. He sits at a corner table and is forced to look at families all around him. He sees fathers cutting up food for their toddlers, mothers laughing with their husbands, and children smiling. The stark contrast between their reality and his stolen life becomes physically unbearable. The grief hits him like a tidal wave, and he has to leave money on the table and walk out into the parking lot just to breathe. This is what clinical destruction looks like. Jay isn't lazy, he isn't weak, he is an incredibly hardworking, decent man who is being crushed from every single angle simultaneously, with zero support, zero validation, and absolute certainty that nobody is coming to save him. He develops anxiety so severe that walking into a grocery store feels like climbing Mount Everest. He enters a deep, dark depression where simply pulling the covers off his body in the morning requires an act of supreme willpower. He experiences diagnosed clinical PTSD from the rapid, violent loss of his family, his home, his wealth, and his entire identity. This is the exact bottom of the pit. Right here, at the absolute bottom of the human experience, is where the trajectory of Jay's life pivots completely. This is the exact fork in the road where most men break permanently. Jay recognized the traps waiting for him. He saw the bottle of alcohol. He knew exactly what it promised: temporary numbness, an escape from the thoughts, a few hours of artificial peace. But he had seen what alcohol did to other broken men around him. It promises a temporary shield, but delivers permanent destruction and a deeper hole. He refused to touch it. He also experimented briefly with modern dating. When you are that lonely, your soul becomes desperate for any form of human warmth, validation, or physical closeness. But when he tried to connect with new people, he realized he was fundamentally too damaged to build anything healthy. He was operating as a wounded wolf, and wounded wolves do not trust the hand that reaches out to pet them, because the last hand that got close completely ripped their life apart. He looked at every new person through the lens of betrayal and loss. Realizing that using people to patch his own internal wounds only left him feeling emptier, colder, and more broken, he stepped away from dating entirely. He was left with a devastating belief that began to take root in his mind. The belief that he was fundamentally unlovable, that he was broken at his core, and that his life was effectively over. That specific belief is the most dangerous narrative a broken man can carry because it easily becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that leads straight to the graveyard. Jay sat in the middle of that dark apartment, surrounded by the wreckage of his financial status, his shattered biology, his social isolation, and the agonizing ache of missing his children, and he forced himself to confront one singular question. If this is the absolute lowest point I will ever experience in my existence, what am I going to do with the pieces? He didn't look for comfort. He didn't look for someone to blame. He completely accepted the terrifying reality that no one was coming to rescue him. His friends weren't coming back, the legal system wasn't going to suddenly become fair, and his old life was gone forever. But as he looked at his hands, he realized one undeniable truth. He was still here. He was still breathing. The world had thrown its absolute worst combination at him, and it hadn't killed him. And if he was still standing, there was a spark of opportunity. What he built from those shattered pieces is what makes him terrifying. The actual rebuilding of a powerful man never happens on a public stage. It doesn't happen on social media, it doesn't happen with an audience, and it doesn't come with a round of applause. It happens in total, unyielding privacy. It happens in the pitch black, in the dead of winter, in absolute silence where nobody is watching, nobody cares, and nobody is keeping score. Jay started his reconstruction with the only variable he had absolute 100% sovereignty over: his physical body. Every single morning, before his conscious mind could fully wake up and swallow him with despair, before the dark thoughts could pin his shoulders to the mattress, he forced his feet onto the cold floor. He would stand in front of the bathroom mirror, look directly into his own tired eyes, and anchor his mind. He didn't wait to feel like working out. He realized that relying on motivation or feelings was a luxury for comfortable men. Feelings are irrelevant when you are fighting for your survival. He drove to the gym at 5 a.m. He didn't care if he had only slept 2 hours. He didn't care if he had been crying in the car on the way there. He understood a foundational law of masculinity. A man who cannot command his own physical body cannot command his mind, his finances, his environment, or his destiny. So he commanded it with military precision. He lifted weights not to build an aesthetic physique for social media, but to force his nervous system to adapt to heavy pressure. And slowly, consistently, his biology responded. His hormone profile stabilized, his sleep deepened, and his vitality began to return. Simultaneously, he began to feed his mind. He completely bypassed the superficial self-help books filled with toxic positivity and empty affirmations. Instead, he studied deep psychology, evolutionary biology, classical philosophy, and history. He wanted to understand the cold, hard mechanics of human behavior. He wanted to dissect attachment theory, trauma responses, and the neurological pathways of pain. He understood that you cannot escape a prison cell if you do not understand how the lock operates. He courageously faced his own childhood wounds and looked back at his marriage with brutal honesty. He didn't do this to torture himself with guilt, but to gain complete self-mastery. He identified his own patterns, his own mistakes, and his own blind spots. A man who thoroughly understands himself can never be surprised or manipulated by external forces again. With his mind and body locked in, he turned his attention to his finances. He took that exhausting weekend part-time job and systematically converted it into a highly focused, independent side business. He worked with an intensity that can only be generated by a man who has absolutely nothing left to lose and everything to prove to himself. Note that distinction. He wasn't doing it to prove his ex-wife wrong or to show his old friends they shouldn't have left. He was doing it to prove to the man in the mirror what he was made of. Through every sleepless night, every grueling workday, and every painful milestone, he kept one sacred promise to his soul. He would not allow his trauma to define his destination. Now let us look at the man who emerges on the other side of this crucible. This is the man the fire produced, and this is precisely why he is the most dangerous human being in any room he enters. First, he can never be controlled through fear again. Why? Because he has already looked his absolute worst nightmare in the face, lived through it in a rented room alone, and conquered it. You cannot threaten him with loss because he has already lost everything he valued and realized that his core self remained completely intact. You cannot manipulate him with the threat of social isolation because he has already spent years in the desert of loneliness and discovered that the silence is actually where a man finds his true power. He moves through the world with an entirely different posture. He isn't loud, he isn't arrogant, and he doesn't engage in petty arguments to prove he is right. He carries an unshakable, heavy internal certainty. There is a dense, grounded quality to his presence that people intuitively feel before he even speaks a single word. He has nothing to prove to anyone on this planet because he has already verified his character in the dark to the only critic that matters, himself. He doesn't react to chaos. He responds with surgical precision. When external pressure hits, and pressure always comes, he does not panic or lash out. He becomes completely still. From that place of deep internal stillness, he evaluates the situation and acts. Women sense this energy immediately. They cannot necessarily explain it logistically, but they feel an intense, authentic sense of safety around him. It's not because he is a soft, harmless person. It is because he is completely certain. And in a chaotic world full of weak, superficial, and uncertain men, a man with absolute internal certainty is the most magnetic force in existence. His children will grow up, and as they mature into adults, they will look back and fully comprehend exactly what their father endured to stay standing for them. They won't see a victim. They won't see a bitter, resentful man who blames the world for his problems. They will see an unyielding pillar of strength, a man who was tested far past the ordinary limits of human endurance and chose every single day to execute his duty. That is the ultimate blueprint of resilience they will carry for the rest of their lives. If you are watching this right now and you find yourself somewhere in Jay's story, whether you are at the absolute beginning where everything is shattering, in the middle of the lonely, exhausting rebuild, or on the other side looking at your scars, you need to hear this clearly. What you are enduring is not a reflection of your worth. It is the forging of your will. The world will never throw a parade for the man who handles his suffering in silence, pays his legal fees, and still shows up to work with a focused mind on Monday morning. The world doesn't see that silent execution, but it is the most extraordinary thing a man can do. You are not failing. You are being forged. Keep your head down, keep your discipline absolute, and refuse to break. The world has enough comfortable men. It needs men who healed themselves alone. Stay dangerous.